Julia Parker, history teacher, stood before the ornate mirror, the weight of her lace-trimmed veil a beautiful, heavy promise. 28 years old, with a life built on carefully planned lessons and the quiet ambition of shaping young minds, she was ready for her own history to begin. The shuttered banquet hall, usually bustling, felt hushed, expectant. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the sparkle of her dress, a perfect traditional vision. She clutched her bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, a nervous flutter in her stomach that was more excitement than fear. Her students, her reputation, her carefully crafted world, everything felt aligned. This was supposed to be the day her story turned a page, a new, predictable chapter. But the minutes ticked by, then the half-hours. The low murmur of guests turned into an anxious hum, then a silence that pressed in on her. The wedding coordinator, her face a mask of polite panic, kept whispering apologies into a phone. Julia's smile faltered. Her heart began to pound a frantic offbeat rhythm against her ribs. She felt a cold dread seep into her veins, chilling her from the tips of her silk shoes to the delicate comb pinning her veil. This wasn't just tardiness, this was wrong. Finally, the coordinator approached, her eyes wide and regretful. He's not coming, Ms. Parker. His family, they sent word. The words hung in the air, shards of glass in a perfect picture. Julia's breath hitched. Not. Incoming. Left at the altar. The humiliation hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Her fiancé, the man she'd planned a future with, had abandoned her. The powerful political family he belonged to, conspicuously absent all morning, had just delivered the final, crushing insult. Hot tears stung her eyes, blurring the elegant lines of the empty hall. She felt a hysterical laugh bubble up, quickly stifled. This wasn't just heartbreak. It was a public execution of her dignity. Her job, her standing in the community, everything she'd worked for, felt suddenly fragile, exposed. She had to disappear. Now. Before the whispers turned into shouts, before the news crews already sniffing around found her. With trembling fingers, she ripped the veil from her hair, letting it fall forgotten to the polished floor. The delicate lace, meant to shroud her in beauty, now felt like a shroud of shame. She dropped the pristine bouquet, the white roses scattering like broken promises. Her cheeks burned. She had to escape this gilded cage, this tomb of shattered dreams. She stumbled towards a side exit, her vision still blurry, the expensive fabric of her gown dragging heavily around her. The air outside was cool, but it offered no relief from the fire in her cheeks. A fine drizzle had begun, streaking the veil she still clutched in her hand. She just needed a taxi, an Uber, anything to take her far away. She hurried past the last vestiges of the venue's back exit, her head down, desperate to be invisible. Then she collided with something solid, unyielding, a wall of tailored charcoal and raw power. Her head snapped up. Standing there, under the flickering neon of a distant inner harbor sign, was a man. Not just any man. He was tall, formidable, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a jawline carved from granite. Gabriel Romano. The name whispered through Baltimore's undercurrents, synonymous with port logistics, with wealth, with danger. His gaze, usually sharp and calculating, softened infinitesimally as it swept over her, taking in her tear-streaked face, her disheveled dress, the abandoned wedding finery clutched in her hand. It was an intensity that promised both peril and, inexplicably, a strange, dark understanding. He observed her, unblinking, and in that moment, Julia felt utterly, terrifyingly seen, her shattered world laid bare before a man who held the city in his hand. The city seemed to turn on Julia with the speed of a snapping trap. She'd barely made it home, still in her ruined dress, before the first whispers escalated to a roar. Her phone, usually a quiet hub of student emails and parent updates, exploded with notifications. Every news outlet in Baltimore, every social media feed, lit up with the story of her abandonment. But it wasn't just about a jilted bride. Her ex-fiancé's family, ruthless in their political maneuvering, had already twisted the narrative. Sources close to the family suggest Ms. Parker's erratic behavior led to the cancellation. Concerns for Ms. Parker's stability raised by former associates. A history teacher's meltdown, jeopardizing her position. The words were poison, dripping across her screen, echoing in the frantic phone calls from concerned colleagues and her principal. They were painting her as unstable, unhinged, all to avoid the financial and reputational fallout of leaving her at the altar. Her job, her spotless record, her entire principled life was being systematically dismantled. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was being publicly crucified. They were stealing her story, replacing it with a lie designed to destroy her. Then the world tilted on its axis. It came through a breaking news alert, flashing across her TV screen, accompanied by a picture of Gabriel Romano, impeccably tailored, standing at a glittering charity gala. The reporter's voice was breathless. In a shocking development port, logistics magnate Gabriel Romano just made a public declaration regarding the abandoned bride, Julia Parker. When asked about the rumors surrounding Ms. Parker's supposed instability, Mr. Romano simply stated, "She's mine now." A bold, unequivocal claim, shifting the focus entirely from the scandal to this new powerful connection. Julia stared at the screen, a choked gasp escaping her lips. "She's mine now." The words vibrated in the air, possessive, dangerous, utterly shocking. Her own outrage. Warred with a bizarre sense of relief, the smear campaign for a split second had been eclipsed. But at what cost? Had she traded one cage for another? The call came an hour later, the number unfamiliar, the voice deep and resonant. "Ms. Parker, Gabriel Romano. My car will be outside your apartment in 15 minutes. We need to talk." There was no question, no room for refusal. She met him in his office, a sleek, glass-walled area overlooking the glittering expanse of the inner harbor. The city lights were a blur beneath them, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. He stood by the window, a silhouette of power, turning slowly as she entered. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a familiar, unsettling intensity. "You have no right," she began, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "No right to claim me like some piece of property. What you did, it's outrageous." He gestured to a plush leather chair, ignoring her outburst. "Sit, Ms. Parker. You're intelligent enough to understand the situation." His tone was calm, infuriatingly so. "Your ex-fiancé's family was destroying you, publicly and efficiently. My declaration redirects the narrative. It gives them a new target, a more formidable one, and buys you time." Julia gripped the arms of the chair. "Time for what? To be your pawn? Your trophy?" The words felt like acid on her tongue. "I won't be used." He finally looked at her fully, his gaze unwavering. "You were being used. Far worse. They were annihilating your reputation, your career. My claim, as you call it, is a shield, a dangerous one, I grant you, but a shield nonetheless." He paused, his expression unreadable. "You wanted to save your job, your standing. This is how." She stared back, her chest tight. He was right. His audacious statement had, in a twisted way, worked. The venom aimed at her had dissipated, replaced by a new, dangerous curiosity about him. But the taste of it was bitter. She wasn't free. She was simply under new management. She felt the subtle shift, the tightening of invisible chains. The freedom she craved, the ability to tell her own story, felt further away than ever. She was protected, yes, but she was also trapped. A new cage, gilded and dangerous, was slowly closing around her. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken demands and simmering resentment. Julia stared at Gabriel Romano across the polished expanse of his desk, the inner harbor glittering like scattered diamonds behind him. She hated this, hated the way his words, so casually possessive, had become her reluctant shield, hated that she even had to consider his offer. "A temporary charade," she finally said, her voice thin but firm. "That's all this can be. You said it yourself, a tactic, not permanent, and certainly not on your terms alone." He leaned back, a faint, almost imperceptible curve to his lips. "Define your terms, Ms. Parker." His challenge was smooth, a velvet glove over an iron fist. Julia's hands clenched under the desk. Her lesson plan book, a tattered testament to her real life, lay forgotten in her bag. She needed it, needed the structure, the purpose it represented. "My terms are simple. My job is non-negotiable. My autonomy is non-negotiable. I will not be your puppet, Mr. Romano. I will not be paraded around, silent and compliant like some prize. This isn't a new cage. It's a temporary alliance, and I walk away when my reputation is clear." His gaze sharpened, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in his storm cloud eyes. Respect, annoyance. "Agreed. For now." The qualifier hung in the air, a subtle threat. "But understand this, Julia. My protection comes with expectations. You will follow my lead in public. You will act the part we establish. This isn't a game for amateurs." She bristled. "I may not operate in your world, Mr. Romano, but I'm no amateur. I teach history. I understand strategy. I understand narratives." And just like that, the world shifted. The public attacks, the insidious whispers about her instability, dried up almost overnight. Gabriel's declaration had been a dam, redirecting the toxic flow. His men, quiet and efficient, became a subtle presence around her building, in the school parking lot. She saw them, always at a discreet distance, always watching. It was an unsettling safety, a constant reminder that she was no longer truly alone, no longer truly vulnerable. But the price was a constant, gnawing awareness of his power, of the invisible chains that now bound her. Their conversations became a series of tense, intellectual sparring matches. He would call, sometimes late, sometimes early, to discuss strategy, though it often felt like he was testing her, probing her limits. "The public expects a certain narrative," he'd said one evening, his voice a low rumble over the phone. "A woman claimed by a man like me doesn't cower. She stands tall, defiant, confident. And you expect me to simply play along?" She'd shot back, pacing her small living room, the lesson plan book clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "To become the woman you've invented? What about the real Julia Parker?" The real Julia Parker, he'd countered, his tone unexpectedly soft, was being destroyed. "The woman I've invented, as you call her, is untouchable. Which version do you prefer?" The question stung because he was right. She hated his methods, despised his possessiveness, but his shield was working. The school board, initially hesitant, had backed off, citing her newfound stability and powerful connections. The public, fickle as ever, was now fascinated by the sudden, dramatic shift in her story, less by her supposed mental state. One afternoon, he insisted she meet him for lunch at a discreet Fells Point restaurant. He watched her across the table, his eyes never leaving her face. "You carry yourself differently now," he observed, swirling wine in his glass. "More guarded, less fragile. I learned quickly that fragility is a luxury I can't afford in your world, she replied, a faint blush rising to her cheeks under his intense scrutiny. The air between them crackled, a dangerous current of attraction that she fought to ignore. It was terrifying, this pull, this strange fascination with the man who had both caged and saved her. He chuckled, a low, rich sound that vibrated through her. Good. You're learning. Keep your lesson plan book close, Julia. But remember, some lessons aren't found in books. His gaze held hers, a silent challenge, a promise of battles yet to come, and a dangerous allure that threatened to unravel her carefully constructed boundaries. Her autonomy was still hers for now, but the negotiation, she knew, had only just begun. The gilded cage, Julia discovered, wasn't always a gilded room. Sometimes it was a sleek black car, whisking her through the city, past the familiar brick row houses, to the unfamiliar, bustling world of the Baltimore docks. She watched the massive cranes hoist containers, the ships dwarfing the men who moved around them with practiced precision. This was Gabriel's empire, not just the polished offices, but the gritty heart of the city, where power was measured in tonnage and timing. He'd insisted she accompany him one afternoon, a necessary exposure to his operations, he'd called it. Julia felt like an alien, her sensible shoes out of place on the oil-stained concrete. But the men on the docks, burly and weathered, nodded respectfully to Gabriel, their eyes flicking to her with a mixture of curiosity and something akin to caution. They knew, they understood the unspoken declaration, the weight of his, "She's mine now." It wasn't just a phrase, it was a decree. She saw the intricate web of his influence, the silent authority he commanded. It was terrifying and, she grudgingly admitted, undeniably effective. No one here questioned her stability. They just knew she belonged to him. Public appearances were the hardest part. They were choreographed dances, each step a calculated move to reinforce the narrative. A charity gala at the National Aquarium, the lights of the inner harbour reflecting off the glass walls, a high-profile business dinner at a Fells Point institution, the scent of expensive food and hushed power thick in the air. Julia, dressed in gowns chosen by Gabriel's discreet stylist, felt like an actress playing a part she hadn't auditioned for. She smiled when expected, listened intently, and kept her answers brief and polite, always aware of the heavy weight of Gabriel's gaze, a silent director guiding her performance. One evening, at a particularly stuffy fundraiser, a woman with a brittle smile and eyes full of sharp judgment approached her. "Ms. Parker," the socialite purred, her voice dripping with false concern, "such a dramatic entrance into Baltimore society. We were all so worried, of course, after the incident." Julia's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to deliver a perfectly worded, dismissive response, but Gabriel was there, a solid presence beside her. He didn't touch her, but his voice, a low rumble, cut through the woman's words like steel. "Mrs. Albright, Julia's dramatic entrance, as you call it, has been nothing short of captivating. Don't you agree?" His eyes, usually unreadable, held a warning that was unmistakable. The socialite smiled, faltered. She stammered a hasty retreat. Julia felt a strange flicker in her chest. He hadn't just protected her, he'd subtly humiliated the woman who sought to humiliate her. It was possessive, yes, but also undeniably protective. She also noticed throughout the evening that he never let her linger alone with any of his younger associates. He kept her by his side, or with a trusted older member of his inner circle. His code, she realized, wasn't just a platitude. He really did intend to take the heat himself, and he clearly took his "never touch a teacher or a kid" principle seriously, extending it even to her professional reputation and perceived vulnerability. The lines between tactical protection and genuine attraction blurred with every shared glance, every brush of hands, as he guided her through a crowded room. His strength, his unwavering confidence, was a dangerous allure. After a particularly long evening, as his driver dropped her off, Gabriel leaned across the console, his eyes dark in the dim light. "You handled yourself well tonight, Julia." His voice was a low murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. Better than well. Before she could respond, before her brain could process the raw intensity of his gaze, his thumb brushed lightly, briefly, over the back of her hand, a feather-light touch that left a trail of fire. Then he straightened, the moment gone. Julia stumbled out of the car, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was protected, yes, but she was also undeniably, perilously drawn to the man who held her. In this gilded cage, she fought against the pull, against the strange, dangerous comfort his presence offered. She knew the peril. She knew the rules of his world were not hers, but the strange allure of his strength, the undeniable spark between them, threatened to burn through every boundary she desperately tried to erect. This wasn't just a charade anymore. It was becoming something far more complicated, far more dangerous. Julia had started to chafe. The gilded cage, for all its undeniable security, was still a cage. She was Gabriel Romano's declared property, and while it had shielded her from the initial onslaught, it also threatened to swallow her whole. Her autonomy, the very thing she'd fought so hard to protect, felt like a constant negotiation. The next invitation arrived, a gala for a prominent political figure, the kind of event where her ex-fiancé's family would undoubtedly be present. Gabriel expected her to go. "Absolutely not," Julia stated, her voice sharper than she'd intended when he called. The polite, agreeable persona she adopted in public vanished the moment she was alone. "I am not a prop for you to parade in front of his family. My agreement was for protection, not public humiliation inflicted on them." There was a beat of silence on the line, a dangerous pause. "Julia," Gabriel's voice was low, a warning note humming beneath it. "This is strategic. Showing them you are unbowed, thriving even, is part of the counter-narrative." "No," she insisted, pacing her apartment, the phone pressed hard against her ear. "It's about my boundaries, my terms. I will not be used to settle your scores, Mr. Romano, and I will not be put in a position where I have to face them, smiling, as if my heart wasn't shattered into a million pieces at their son's convenience." Her voice trembled with the last words, betraying a vulnerability she usually fought to conceal. Another silence. This one different, less dangerous, more thoughtful. "Understood," he finally said, the single word soft, devoid of his usual commanding edge. "Then we will not go. But be prepared for another tactic from them. They won't appreciate your absence." That night, alone in her apartment, a strange quiet settled over Julia. Relief warred with a prickle of surprise. He had listened. He had respected her boundary, even when it went against his supposed strategy. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. A few days later, a news report flashed across her screen. A minor scandal involving a small shipping company trying to cut corners at the port, quickly and cleanly shut down. The article mentioned Gabriel Romano's decisive action. Later, she saw him on a local news clip, a brief shot of him walking purposefully, his face grim, the weight of his empire etched in the lines around his eyes. He looked tired, burdened, not the invincible, calculating figure she usually saw. He was a man with immense power, yes, but also immense responsibility. He didn't just command, he carried. It was a fleeting glimpse behind his formidable facade, a moment of guarded vulnerability that resonated with her own. He wasn't just playing a game. He was fighting battles she couldn't comprehend. The truce, however, remained fragile. Weeks passed without overt attacks, but the undercurrent of threat never truly disappeared. An anonymous email landed in her school's general inbox, subtly questioning her focus and reliability after her personal troubles. It was vague enough to be dismissed, but precise enough to plant doubt. And once, walking to her car, she overheard two of Gabriel's men speaking in low tones, mentioning a brother making inquiries, sniffing around. The ex's family was still out there, biding their time, looking for another weakness. Julia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. His protection was a shield, but it wasn't a permanent solution. It was a dangerous game, one she hadn't chosen, but was now forced to play. "Why?" she asked him directly one evening, during one of their strategy calls. "Why are you doing this, Gabriel? Is it just about power? About showing them you can? Or is there something else?" His response was immediate, his voice a low, steady current. "I never allow a woman to be humiliated publicly without a reckoning, and I never allow my word to be challenged. They chose to challenge it when they attacked you again after my declaration." It was a cold, logical answer, rooted in his code, his pride, his world. But as she listened, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, a hint of something deeper, something less easily defined than a mere power play. Was it a sense of justice, however skewed by his methods? Or was it something else entirely, a dangerous growing connection between them that he too was struggling to define? The question lingered, fueling her cautious fascination, making her wonder if the invisible chains weren't just around her, but around him too. The respite was a lie. Julia knew it deep in her bones, even as the immediate public clamor had died down. The ex's political family, bruised and bleeding financially from the wedding cancellation, wouldn't simply retreat. They were sharks, and they had just been denied their meal. The first blow landed subtly, a formal letter from the school district to Principal Davies. Not a dismissal, not yet, but a review of conduct, prompted by anonymous concerns regarding professional judgment and fitness to lead a classroom. Julia's blood ran cold. This wasn't about her public humiliation anymore. This was about her livelihood, her calling. They weren't just trying to smear her. They were trying to take away everything she'd built. Then came the articles, cleverly worded pieces in smaller local online tabloids. They didn't mention the wedding directly. Instead, they focused on her unpredictable temperament, her distraction in the classroom, even a veiled suggestion that her personal struggles might make her unfit to be around impressionable young minds. The insidious nature of it churned her stomach. It was a direct hit below the belt, targeting her very essence as a teacher. Principal Davies called her into his office, his face a grim mask. He held up printouts of the articles, his gaze apologetic but firm. "Julia, I believe in you. You know that. But the district is getting calls. From parents, from board members. They're demanding a response. This is bad." Julia felt a wave of icy panic wash over her. Her lesson plan book, always a symbol of her control, her purpose, lay open on her desk at home, a stark reminder of the life they were trying to steal. The integrity she'd guarded so fiercely, the reputation she'd painstakingly built, was being systematically dismantled, brick by agonizing brick. It was working. They were succeeding. The next call from Gabriel was different. His usual calm, controlled cadence was replaced by a low, simmering fury she'd never heard before. "They're coming after your job," he stated, not a question, a declaration, "suggesting you're unfit for your students." Julia's throat tightened. "They are. It's working, Gabriel. My job is on the line." "They have crossed a line," he growled, the raw edge to his voice sending a shiver down her spine. They have violated my code. You are a teacher, Julia. You work with children. That is sacred. That is untouchable." His words were not just about her. They were about a deeper principle, a dark line in his world that had been irrevocably breached. "This changes things." She listened as he spoke, his voice shifting to a rapid-fire series of instructions to someone on his end, a flurry of names and terse commands she barely understood. He was mobilizing, not just to protect her, but to retaliate. He was incensed, personally offended by the direct attack on her professional life, on her sanctity as an educator. And in that moment, despite the fear, despite her resistance to his world, a flicker of something new ignited within her: gratitude and relief. He was dangerous, possessive, a man of shadows and power, but he was also fighting for her, fiercely and without compromise. Her enemy had finally become his enemy, not just a pawn in his game. For the first time, truly, their goals aligned against a common, vicious foe. The shield was no longer just a charade, it was a weapon, and Gabriel Romano was about to wield it. The furious hum of Gabriel's network was like a low, dangerous vibration beneath the city's surface. For 2 days, he'd been a ghost, his calls brief, his voice tight with a controlled fury. Julia felt a strange, unsettling quiet without his constant, watchful presence. She knew he was working, knew he was leveraging his formidable resources, and the thought both terrified and reassured her. Then the call came, late, after the city had gone quiet. "They're desperate, Julia." Gabriel's voice was a gravelly whisper. "More desperate than I anticipated." He didn't need to explain. His people had dug. They'd unearthed the paper trail, the digital breadcrumbs. It wasn't just about avoiding deposit losses from the cancelled wedding. It was about a major political donation the ex-fiancé's family had secured, contingent on a stable, respectable union. Her public humiliation, her supposed instability, was a convenient, vicious narrative to explain away the broken engagement and protect their carefully constructed web of influence and wealth. It was about control, about reputation, theirs, not hers. Julia listened, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "So, it's not just about money," she murmured, the truth hitting her with sickening clarity. "It's about power, and they'll destroy anyone who threatens it." She thought of her lesson plan book, her classroom, her students. They were trying to annihilate her, not just because she was inconvenient, but because she inadvertently disrupted their carefully orchestrated lives. Gabriel's silence on the line was heavy, confirming her darkest fears. "This is my world, Julia," he finally said, his voice tinged with a weariness she'd never heard before. "It's not clean, it's not simple, and it's getting ugly." She felt it then, the deep chasm opening between them. His world, with its unseen strings and brutal logic, was encroaching on her meticulously ordered life. The thought of engaging in his kind of battle, of stooping to their level, made her stomach churn. Was saving her reputation worth becoming something she despised? Was this protection a step too far into the darkness? I need a moment," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to think." "Think quickly," he responded, his voice hardening, pulling back from the momentary vulnerability. "They won't wait, and neither will I." The line went dead. Julia sank onto her sofa, the phone still clutched in her hand. The unsettling safety had morphed into something far more dangerous. She was witnessing the raw, ugly underbelly of Gabriel's power, the lengths he would go to, the methods he employed. This wasn't just strategic. It felt like a descent into something morally ambiguous. She was a teacher, a woman of principles. How much of herself was she willing to compromise? To what extent could she allow Gabriel's methods to become her own? The image of her students flashed in her mind. What kind of example would she be setting if she simply let Gabriel fight her? Battles, using means she couldn't condone. She taught them history, the narratives of power, of resistance, of those who fought to reclaim their stories. She had always believed in integrity, in facing injustice head-on, but on her own terms. A sudden, fierce resolve ignited within her. Gabriel's world was grey, but her core wasn't. She wouldn't become a pawn, not for them and not for him. She wouldn't let them dictate her story, and she wouldn't let Gabriel entirely dictate her defense. She had to fight, but she had to fight her way. She grabbed her lesson plan book, not for comfort, but for inspiration. She flipped through the pages, past notes on civil rights movements and political revolutions. History was full of people who had been silenced, slandered, their narratives twisted, but it was also full of those who had found their voice, who had used language as a shield, as a weapon to rewrite their own stories. Julia closed her eyes, picturing the news headlines, the scathing articles. They had crafted a narrative of instability. She would craft one of truth. She would reclaim her story, not just through Gabriel's brute force, but with her own intellect, her own words. She would dictate the terms. The ex-fiancé's family didn't wait long. Julia had barely processed Gabriel's stark warning before the next blow landed, delivered with the polite ruthlessness only old money and political power could muster. It wasn't a direct attack this time, but an insidious offer. Solution, they called it. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at her door, no return address, only her name elegantly scripted. Inside, on expensive paper, lay a non-disclosure agreement, NDA. The acronym hit her like a physical blow. It was pages long, dense with legal jargon. But the core message was chillingly clear. Sign away her right to speak, to share her story, to ever mention the wedding, the abandonment, or their family again. In exchange, a paltry sum, a fraction of the deposits. They'd lost, and a clause that required her to issue a public statement admitting emotional distress leading to a misunderstanding of the engagement's terms. A public admission of fault, a public lie. Her hands trembled as she read it, the elegant script blurring. They weren't just trying to smear her, they were trying to erase her, to silence her completely, to make her complicit in her own destruction. The rage, cold and potent, flared in her chest. They wanted her to say she was unstable, to validate their narrative, to willingly walk back into the gilded cage they'd built for her. No, she whispered, the word a fierce exhalation. Absolutely not. She called Gabriel, her voice tight with suppressed fury. They sent me an NDA. They want me to sign it, to say I was unstable. There was a pause on his end, a heavy silence that spoke volumes. And what did you tell them? His voice was dangerously calm. I didn't tell them anything, she snapped, clutching the phone so hard her knuckles ached. I'm telling you, I will not sign it. I will not be silenced. I will not lie for them, Gabriel. Not for any amount of money, not for any promise of peace. They are not stealing my story. Her voice trembled with the last words, but her resolve was iron. She had lost too much already. She wouldn't lose her voice. He listened, quietly, as her anger poured out, her defiance burning through the phone line. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to dissuade her. When she finally finished, breathless, he said, "Good." The single word was a profound affirmation, a stark contrast to the polite, dismissive tone of the family's lawyers. That's what I expected. Julia could almost see him, standing by his office window, the city lights reflecting in his storm cloud eyes. He had been observing her, testing her, and she had passed. He understood her now, understood that simply protecting her was not enough. She needed to fight, and she needed to win on her own terms. Simply protecting. You is no longer sufficient, Julia, he said, his voice dropping, becoming more intricate. They want to erase you. We will ensure that never happens. A new plan, more dangerous, more complex, began to form in his words. You will not just be shielded, you will strike back. With my help, and with your own hand. His words sent a thrill of fear, and something else, a strange, exhilarating sense of empowerment, through her. He wasn't offering her a new cage. He was offering her a weapon, and the chance to wield it herself. She looked down at the non-disclosure agreement, its crisp paper suddenly less intimidating, more like a blueprint for her counterattack. It was a tangible representation of their attempt to silence her, and she would use it. Not by signing, but by tearing it apart piece by piece on her own terms. The price of silence, she knew, was her soul, and that was a price she absolutely refused to pay. The knock on her classroom door was sharp, out of place. Julia glanced up. From grading papers, a frown creasing her brow. It wasn't Principal Davies, and no student ever knocked like that. A man stood framed in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a rumpled suit that couldn't quite hide the bulk of a holster under his arm. His eyes, the color of dirty river water, swept over her, then around the empty classroom, lingering on the historical maps and student artwork. "Ms. Parker?" His voice was gruff, an interrogator's tone. "Detective Miller, just a few questions about your recent associations." Julia's stomach twisted. Miller. The name had been whispered in hushed tones around the precinct, a cop notorious for his flexible ethics, for leaning into the influence of powerful families. He wasn't here about justice. He was here as a tool for the ex-fiancée's family, a blunt instrument to apply more pressure. "My associations are professional, Detective," Julia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She pushed her lesson plan book closer, a small shield. "And my classroom is not the place for this," he smirked, a chilling flash of yellowed teeth. "Oh, I think it's exactly the place, especially with the rumors circulating about your stability. Wouldn't want anything to happen to your spotless record now, would we?" The veiled threat hung in the air, thick and rancid. He was implying she was unfit to teach, piling on the existing smear. Julia felt a cold fury rise, but she held her tongue, knowing any outburst would only feed his narrative. He left as abruptly as he arrived, leaving behind a lingering scent of stale coffee and menace. Julia stared at the empty doorway, her heart pounding. This wasn't just about the NDA anymore. They were coming for her entire life, and they were using the law itself as a weapon. That night, Gabriel called. His voice was sharper than usual, devoid of pleasantries. "Miller paid you a visit." It wasn't a question. Julia recounted the encounter, her voice tight with anger and fear. "He implied I was unstable, unfit for my job. He was trying to intimidate me, Gabriel. They're using him." "I know," he said, a low growl in his tone. "He's a dog on their leash, which makes him perfect for our purposes." Julia stiffened. "Our purposes? What are you talking about?" "We hit back, Julia, harder than they ever expected. We use their tactics against them, but with a twist they won't see coming." His voice dropped, becoming a low, intricate murmur, fragments of a dangerous plan. "Emerging from the shadows, Miller won't be working for them much longer. He's going to work for us, or rather for the truth." Julia felt a thrill of cold dread. "What truth? What are you suggesting, Gabriel? I'm not engaging in anything illegal." Her principles, her unwavering moral compass, screamed in protest. "No," he said, and for once his voice held an uncharacteristic note of reassurance. "You won't. This isn't illegal. It's a different kind of justice, a trap. They want to corner you, to force you into silence. We'll let them, and when they think they have you, we'll turn the tables." She listened, skeptical, but a sliver of desperate hope began to form. He spoke of leverage, of exposing their machinations, of using their own arrogance to dismantle their smear. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also brilliant. A history teacher, she understood strategy, she understood narrative, and she saw the intelligence in his twisted plan. "I'll do it," she said, the words surprising even herself, "but on my terms. My safety is paramount. If at any point I feel this crosses a line I cannot ethically justify, or if I am put in genuine physical danger, I walk, and you let me. No questions, no arguments." She needed an exit strategy, a guarantee of her autonomy. This wasn't just about winning, it was about not losing herself in the process. There was a beat of silence on his end, a pause heavy with unspoken demands. "Agreed," he finally said, the word clipped, firm. "But if you're in completely. You follow my instructions without question in the moment. You trust me, Julia. Unwavering commitment. This isn't a dress rehearsal." Julia took a deep breath. It was a terrifying leap of faith, a dangerous pact with a man whose world was still largely an enigma. But looking at the non-disclosure agreement lying on her table, the symbol of their attempt to erase her, she knew she had no other choice. She would fight, and for once, she wouldn't fight alone. She would trust the lion to guard her, even if she knew she might get scratched. "You have it," she whispered, the words sealing their dangerous alliance. "My commitment. Now tell me, Gabriel, what's the plan?" "He's not a dog on their leash, Julia." Gabriel's voice, now stripped of its earlier menace, held a new, almost weary quality. "He's internal affairs. He's been feeding us information all along." Julia stared at the phone, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Detective Miller, the gruff, menacing cop who had just threatened her job, who reeked of corruption and stale coffee. Internal affairs? The revelation hit her like a physical blow, shattering her perception of the last few days, of everything she thought she knew. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the sneering detective with a man working for justice. "What?" she finally managed, her voice a reedy whisper. He threatened me. In my classroom." "A necessary performance," Gabriel explained, his voice softening, a rare note of something akin to apology in his tone. "To convince them he was on their side, to make them complacent. He's been working this angle for months, trying to get enough on the ex-fiancé's brother, Marcus. The family's political maneuvers, the pressure they apply to local officials. It's a systemic issue. Your situation, unfortunately, became the perfect leverage." Julia sank onto her sofa, the pieces slowly, terrifyingly, slotting into place. The casual threats, the veiled insinuations, all a show for the invisible eyes of Marcus. Miller hadn't been a threat to her. He'd been playing a part in a much larger, darker drama, a dangerous game of chess, and she was a critical piece. "So, what's the plan now?" she asked, her voice gaining strength, the initial shock giving way to a cold, analytical focus. She was a history teacher. She understood strategy, the careful construction of a narrative. This was a narrative being built, piece by dangerous piece. Gabriel didn't hesitate. "We finish it. Marcus has been pushing for you to sign that NDA. He thinks he's cornered you. He thinks Miller has you scared. We use that arrogance against him." He outlined the details, each word a brushstroke, painting a vivid, perilous picture. The location, the docks, naturally, Gabriel's territory, a place where his authority was unquestioned, where security could be absolute. The timing, late, under the cover of darkness, ensuring minimal witnesses, maximum intimidation. Julia's role, crucial. She would meet Marcus, feigning vulnerability, allowing him to believe he had won. He would attempt to intimidate her into signing the NDA, probably gloating, reveling in her supposed defeat. "He'll threaten you, Julia," Gabriel warned, his voice grave. "He'll detail how his family will destroy your career, how they've engineered this whole smear. He'll believe he's safe, that Miller will back him up, or at least look the other way." "And then Miller steps in," Julia finished, understanding dawning. "A staged near arrest. He'll make it look like he's about to apprehend me on some trumped-up charge related to the smear, to make Marcus feel completely secure, completely in control." "Exactly," Gabriel confirmed. "He'll think the police are on his side, he'll think he's untouchable, and that's when he'll say too much. All of it, on tape, everything we need to expose him and his family." The cold knot in Julia's stomach tightened. This was it, the precipice. Her role was to be bait, to play the victim convincingly enough to draw out the truth. She had to appear vulnerable, but deep down she knew she had to remain strong, to remember what she was fighting for. Her job, her reputation, her story. "The stakes are incredibly high, Julia," Gabriel said, his voice quiet now, serious. "If Marcus suspects anything, if he doesn't take the bait, the whole plan falls apart. Your name won't just be smeared, it will be irrevocably damaged. And my position, it will be uncompromised. There's no turning back once we set this in motion." She looked at her lesson plan book, lying on the coffee table, a beacon of her normal, principled life. This wasn't normal. This was dangerous. But it was also her only path to reclaim her truth, to fight back on her terms, not just as a victim, but as an active participant in her own defense. She had demanded agency, and Gabriel was offering it, albeit in the most terrifying way imaginable. Julia took a deep, steadying breath. "Tell me what to do," she said, her voice clear, resolute. "I'm ready." The cold, damp air of the Baltimore docks clung to Julia like a second skin. It was late, the sky a bruised purple, and the massive cranes stood silhouetted against the distant glow of the inner harbor, skeletal giants reaching for nothing. She clutched the harbor water taxi pass in her hand, the plastic cool against her clammy palm, a strange symbol of her journey into Gabriel's world. The taxi had dropped her at a secluded pier, far from the usual tourist bustle, a place of industry and shadows. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her resolve was a steel rod down her spine. Then she saw him. Marcus, her ex-fiancé's brother, stood by a stack of shipping containers, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the gritty surroundings. His face, usually smug, held a predatory grin as she approached. He looked exactly like the kind of man who thought he always won. "Well, well, Miss Parker," he drawled, his voice oily. "Decided to finally see reason, have we?" He gestured to the non-disclosure agreement he held, crisp and white against the dim light. "Thought you could play hardball with my family? We always get what we want, Julia. Always." Julia forced herself to keep her gaze steady, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to play her part, appear vulnerable, broken. "What do you want, Marcus?" she managed, her voice a little shaky, just enough to be convincing. He chuckled, a nasty sound. "Simple. You sign this. You admit you're unstable. You go away quietly. We get our deposits back, our political favors stay intact, and your little teaching career dies a quiet, dignified death. Or," his voice dropped, heavy with menace, "we make sure it's a very public, very messy death. We've already started, haven't we? Heard the principal's been getting some interesting calls." He gloated, leaning in, his breath sour. "You think you can fight us? You're nothing. A jilted bride. A hysterical teacher. No one will believe you. Everyone will believe us. We own this city, Julia. We own the narrative. Miller's already on our payroll, making sure any complications disappear. You're done." Julia swallowed, her throat dry. He was saying it all. Every vile detail, the hidden microphones, the tiny cameras Gabriel's men had meticulously placed, were surely picking up every venomous word. She had to keep him talking. "And what if I don't sign?" she whispered, letting a hint of desperation creep into her tone. Marcus's grin widened. "Then you lose everything, your job, your reputation, any shred of dignity you think you have left. We'll make sure you can't get a job teaching anywhere, not even in a backwater school. You'll be a pariah, Julia, a cautionary tale." He moved closer, his hand reaching for her arm, ready to force the pen into her hand. "Just sign it. It's over." Just as his fingers brushed her sleeve, a siren wailed in the distance, growing rapidly louder. Headlights flashed through the gloom, searing white. A patrol car screeched to a halt, blocking their path. Detective Miller, no longer rumpled but grim and official, jumped out, two uniformed officers right behind him. "Detective Miller!" Marcus exclaimed, surprised but clearly pleased. "Perfect timing. This woman is causing trouble." Miller ignored him, his eyes fixed on Julia, his face a mask of cold authority. "Julia Parker, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and falsifying reports." "Regarding a public official." His voice boomed, sharp and clear. He grabbed her arm, surprisingly firm, and began to pull her towards the patrol car. "You have the right to remain silent." Panic, real and visceral, surged through Julia. This was the near arrest. This was the show. She had to hold on. She had to remember her part. She stumbled, playing the terrified, broken woman. Marcus, his face alight with triumph, stepped forward, believing his plan was perfectly executed. "See, Julia, I told you no one crosses my family. Miller, make sure she gets the book thrown at her, and tell your superiors this little incident confirms everything we've been saying about her instability. This whole wedding charade, it was a setup, an attempt to blackmail my brother. We have emails, texts, everything. We'll bury her." He laughed, a harsh, triumphant sound, utterly convinced he was safe, untouchable, with the law seemingly on his side. "You really thought you could win, little teacher? With Romano's help, he's nothing. You're nothing. This whole pathetic attempt to ruin my brother, it's going to cost you everything. And we'll make sure the world knows just how unhinged you truly are." The flash of a tiny red light, barely visible on a nearby shipping container, winked in the darkness. It was done. The trap was sprung. The moment Detective Miller released her arm, ushering her into the back of his unmarked car instead of the patrol vehicle, Julia felt the adrenaline crash like a tidal wave. She sank onto the worn seat, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the cold dampness of the dock seeping into her bones. Her body trembled, a delayed reaction to the terror she'd just mimed, the genuine fear that had still pulsed beneath her carefully constructed performance. Marcus's triumphant, venomous laughter still echoed in her ears. Miller, now shedding his gruff facade, glanced back at her. "You did good, Miss Parker." He swallowed it whole. He exchanged a quick, knowing look with Gabriel, who appeared out of the shadows, his face grim, eyes scanning the deserted pier. Gabriel opened the car door, his presence filling the small space. He didn't touch her, but his gaze, deep and intense, swept over her, assessing. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, a rumble against the still, thrumming silence of the night. Julia could only nod, mute, the words stuck in her throat. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but a fierce, triumphant satisfaction began to bloom in her chest. They had it. Marcus's gloating, his explicit threats, his family's machinations, all on tape. The evidence. "The recording is secure," Gabriel confirmed, his gaze never leaving her face. "Every word." His eyes, usually unreadable, held a new depth, a flicker of something raw and intense. He had seen her, truly seen her, standing alone against Marcus's viciousness, playing a role that demanded immense courage. He had witnessed her composure, her unwavering resolve, even as she feigned terror. And in that moment, an unspoken vow solidified in his mind, a silent promise that went far beyond mere protection. His feelings for her, already tangled and complex, now settled into something deeper, recognizing not just the woman he wanted to shield, but the formidable, principled woman she truly was. He saw her strength, not just her vulnerability. Miller cleared his throat. "We'll get this to the right people. This should be enough to flip the narrative, Miss Parker. Get your name cleared." Julia finally found her voice, a little hoarse but steady. "No." Both men looked at her, surprised. She pushed herself upright, the NDA still clutched in her hand, a crumpled testament to her defiance. "No," she repeated, her voice gaining strength, echoing the steel in her spine. "You don't just get my name cleared. This isn't just about the evidence. This is about my story. They tried to steal it. They tried to silence me, and I decide how that story is told now." Gabriel's eyes narrowed, a slow smile, almost imperceptible, playing on his lips. He understood. This was the agency she'd fought for, the control she demanded. He wouldn't simply handle it for her, she would dictate the terms. "The NDA," she said, looking from the crumpled paper to Gabriel's unwavering gaze. "They wanted me to sign it, to admit fault, to disappear. I'm going to use it. Not to sign, but to tear it apart, publicly." Miller looked hesitant. "Miss Parker, that's highly unorthodox. We have legal channels, proper procedures for this kind of evidence. And they'll bury it in paperwork, in delays, until the public forgets," Julia countered, her history teacher's understanding of public narrative kicking in. "No, this is how we fight. This is how I reclaim my voice. They wanted to humiliate me. I will ensure they are humiliated on my terms." She looked at Gabriel, a silent question in her eyes. "Are you with me?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable, but the intensity in his eyes confirmed it. "She's right," Gabriel said, turning to Miller. "This isn't just about legal victory. It's about public perception. It's about narrative. We give her the platform. The evidence ensures their cooperation." Miller sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, Miss Parker. Unorthodox, but I'll concede potentially impactful. What's next?" Julia felt a thrill of power, cold and exhilarating. The trust between her and Gabriel, forged in the shadows of the docks, was now an undeniable force. They had a weapon, and she intended to wield it. "Next," Julia said, looking at Gabriel, a spark of challenge and undeniable attraction passing between them, "we set the stage, and then we dictate the terms of their apology." The tension was palpable, a dangerous promise of the battle yet to come, and the new uncharted path they would walk together. The rain lashed against the panoramic windows of Gabriel's penthouse, a relentless drumming that mirrored the frantic beat of Julia's heart. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the very foundations of the building, and the city lights below blurred into streaks of gold and crimson through the water-streaked glass. It was the eve of battle, and the storm outside felt like a physical manifestation of the tempest raging within her. She stood beside Gabriel, the non-disclosure agreement now a crumpled, defiant weapon in her hand, no longer a symbol of her intended silence. The recording, secured and duplicated, was the hammer. Her narrative, her voice, would be the anvil. "Miller's contacts will ensure the recording reaches the right ears within the press," Gabriel explained, his voice a low counterpoint to the storm. "Enough to corner them, to give them no choice but to face you. We'll leak just enough to make them sweat, to force them into a public appearance. But the full impact, the definitive blow, that's yours." Julia nodded, her gaze fixed on the NDA. "They want me to admit fault, to say I was. Unstable, to disappear quietly. Her voice was tight with renewed anger. I'm not just tearing this, Gabriel. I'm reading it. Every humiliating clause, every attempt to silence me, and then I'm dictating my own terms for their public apology. Gabriel turned to her, his eyes dark as the storm clouds outside, holding a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Admiration, perhaps. Bold, he murmured, the single word rich with approval. It will expose their ruthlessness for what it is. And it will leave them nowhere to hide. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her face. Are you ready for that kind of exposure, Julia? It will be raw, unflinching. I'm ready, she affirmed, her chin lifting. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, unyielding resolve. She had been humiliated, slandered, almost erased. Now it was her turn to control the narrative. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about reclaiming her story, word by painful word. The air in the penthouse grew heavy, thick with the unspoken weight of the night to come. The rain intensified, drumming louder, and the city felt like it was holding its breath. You took an enormous risk for me, Gabriel, Julia said, her voice softer, laced with a vulnerability that surprised even herself. She looked away from the window, turning to face him fully. Putting yourself, your operations, at risk for a history teacher you barely knew. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable, but the intensity in his eyes deepened. My code, Julia, he said, his voice a low rumble. Never humiliate a woman. Never allow a challenge to my word to go unanswered. He paused, then, a flicker of raw honesty in his storm cloud depths. And you proved yourself to be far more than just a teacher. You are fiercely intelligent, unwavering in your principles. You stood against them, against me, even when you were terrified. That takes a different kind of strength. A strength I respect. His words, so unexpected, settled over her like a warm blanket against the storm. He saw her, not just the jilted bride, not just the pawn, but the woman beneath it all. The lines between them, blurred for so long by circumstance and power, began to redefine themselves in the quiet intimacy of the moment. The high stakes, the shared danger, had forged a connection stronger than either of them had anticipated. It was a dark, dangerous romance, built not on roses and fairy tale endings, but on shared battles and grudging respect. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second, then gently cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing lightly over her skin. The simple touch sent a jolt through her, a current of electricity that sizzled through the tense air. His eyes, dark and searching, held hers, a silent question passing between them. The world outside, the storm, the looming confrontation, all faded into the background. There was only the quiet hum of their breathing, the rain and the undeniable, dangerous pull between them. Tomorrow they would face the world. Tomorrow Julia would reclaim her voice. But tonight, on the eve of battle, the only truth that mattered was the one silently acknowledged between them, a promise of a future yet unwritten, built on the shifting sands of power and a newfound, fragile trust. The rain lashed down, a furious symphony against the glass and steel of the inner harbour. Julia stood on the penthouse rooftop, the wind tearing at her dress, whipping strands of hair across her face. The neon signs of the city below blurred into streaks of vibrant colour, reflecting in the puddles that slicked the asphalt. Cold, biting air filled her lungs, but it was nothing compared to the fire in her veins. This was it, the reckoning. A small crowd of reporters, their cameras flashing despite the downpour, huddled under umbrellas, their lenses trained on the ex-fiancé's family. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, flanked by their smirking son, Marcus, looked pale and uncomfortable. They stood before a microphone, forced into this public display by the undeniable evidence Gabriel had provided. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, his voice tight with forced contrition. My family wishes to issue a statement regarding recent misunderstandings. We deeply regret any distress caused to Ms. Julia Parker. While personal matters can be complex, we acknowledge that certain rumors circulated without our explicit approval. We hope Ms. Parker can find peace and move forward. It was a pathetic, carefully worded non-apology designed to deflect and minimize. Julia felt a fresh wave of rage wash over her. They were still trying to control the narrative, even now, but not anymore. She stepped forward, pushing past the security Gabriel had placed, the sound of her heels clicking sharply on the wet concrete. The cameras swiveled, blinding lights momentarily disorienting her. She found Gabriel's gaze across the rooftop. He stood near the stairwell entrance, a formidable silhouette against the stormy sky, his men discreetly positioned, hands off, just as she'd demanded. His eyes, dark and unwavering, held hers, a silent anchor in the storm. This was her moment. Julia held up the crumpled non-disclosure agreement, its cream-colored paper stark against the gloom. Misunderstandings? She echoed, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the drumming rain. Is that what you call this? She unfolded the document, smoothing it with trembling fingers. This is a non-disclosure agreement sent to me by this family. She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. It demands my silence. It offers a meager sum in exchange for me admitting emotional distress leading to a misunderstanding of the engagement's terms. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes blazing. It demands that I publicly state I was unstable, that I was lying, that they were the victims. A gasp went through the reporters. Marcus's face, a moment ago smug, now paled, his eyes wide with dawning horror. His parents shifted uneasily, their carefully constructed facade crumbling. You wanted to bury me, Julia continued, her voice rising, filled with the raw emotion of months of humiliation and fear. You wanted to steal my voice, my reputation, my entire life. You smeared my name, threatened my job, and then you tried to buy my silence. She held the NDA high for all the cameras to see. But my story is not for sale. My voice is not for silencing, and my truth will not be dictated by your lies. With a powerful, deliberate motion, she ripped the document clean in half, the sound a sharp tear that sliced through the driving rain. Then she tore it again and again, letting the pieces flutter from her fingers, carried away by the wind. My terms are simple, she declared, her voice ringing with newfound power. A full public retraction of every false accusation, a statement acknowledging your family's direct involvement in the smear campaign, an apology not just for distress, but for slander, for manipulation, for attempting to destroy a woman's career and reputation. Her eyes swept over the Sterling family, then settled on Marcus, who now looked utterly broken. And an assurance that this will never happen again, to me or to anyone else. She looked back at the cameras, her gaze unwavering. I am Julia Parker. I am a history teacher, and my integrity is not negotiable. Gabriel watched her, a silent witness to her triumph. The storm played around her, but she stood unyielding, a beacon of defiance. He saw the fierce intelligence, the unwavering principles, the raw courage that had captivated him from the moment he first saw her. The "she's mine now" had been a tactic, a shield. But watching her tear that document, watching her reclaim her story, he knew with absolute certainty that she was nobody's. She was her own. And in that realization, a profound respect, deep and unshakable, cemented itself within him. The boundaries had been clearly set, not by him but by her, and he would honor every single one. The rain had stopped. Julia stood alone on the rooftop, the lingering chill seeping into her bones, but the fire inside her burned brighter than any neon sign. The reporters had scattered, leaving the Sterling family to their shame, their carefully constructed lies dismantled in front of the world. Her hand still tingled from the deliberate tearing of the NDA. It wasn't just paper she'd ripped, it was the chains of their narrative. The next few days were a whirlwind of vindication. Her phone, once a source of terror, buzzed with messages of support. Principal Davies, his face beaming, assured her not only that her job was secure, but that her integrity had been unequivocally affirmed. Colleagues offered quiet nods of respect. Students, surprisingly aware of the real story, looked at her with new admiration. The local news, once quick to parrot the Sterling smears, now hailed her as a symbol of resilience, a woman who had dared to stand up to power. Julia Parker, history teacher, was no longer just a name. She was a story, and she had finally reclaimed it. But the woman who walked through the hallways of her school, who meticulously planned her lessons, was not the same woman who had stood trembling at the altar. The fear was gone, replaced by a steel-edged confidence. She was stronger, more assertive, keenly aware of the power of her own voice, her own narrative. The world had tried to break her, but she had shattered its expectations instead. A week after the rooftop, a quiet knock came at her apartment door. Julia opened it to find Gabriel Romano standing there, not in a tailored suit, but in a simple dark sweater, his hair slightly rumpled, his eyes holding a vulnerability she hadn't seen since that fleeting moment in his penthouse. He looked less like a magnate, more like a man. "Julia," he said, his voice soft, a stark contrast to the commanding presence she'd grown accustomed to. He held nothing in his hands, no flowers, no extravagant gifts, just himself. She stepped back, allowing him entry, her heart giving a strange, unfamiliar flutter. The attraction was still there, a dangerous current, but now it was tempered with a profound respect. He walked to her living room window, looking out at the city, the very city he commanded, yet his focus was entirely on her. "You were magnificent, Julia," he said, his voice low. "You commanded. That stage, you didn't just win, you redefined what winning looked like." Julia watched him, her arms crossed, a shield she no longer truly needed. "It was a dangerous game, Gabriel, one you pulled me into." He turned, his storm cloud eyes meeting hers. "I offered a shield. You turned it into a sword. I watched you fight for your truth, for your agency, and I learned from it. My initial claim, she's mine now. It was a tactic, a crude one perhaps, but effective. But watching you, I realized how wrong that sentiment was." He took a step closer, then stopped, respecting the invisible line she hadn't even drawn yet. "You are nobody's, Julia. You are entirely your own." The words were an unexpected balm, a validation of everything she had fought for, but she wouldn't let it be that easy. "And what does that mean for us, Gabriel?" she asked, her voice steady. "If there is an us at all, because I won't be owned, I won't be a trophy, and I certainly won't be a secret." He met her gaze, his expression serious, unwavering. "It means this: if there is an us, it will be on your terms. Explicit consent, Julia, every step of the way. Your boundaries are paramount, your voice, your choices, always respected. I made a declaration once. Now I ask for the chance to build something real with you, not on my terms, but on equal ground. A partnership, if that's what you want." Julia studied him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the subtle shift in his posture, the man who had learned to respect her power, The path ahead was still uncertain, dangerous even, but it was a path she would walk with her eyes open, her head held high. And for the first time since that terrible wedding day, she felt a genuine, unburdened hope. She took a slow breath, the choice clear, decisive. "Then yes, Gabriel, I want that." Her voice was soft, but firm, an affirmation of her agency and a promise of a new beginning. But understand this, if you ever forget those terms, even for a moment, I walk away and I don't look back. A faint smile touched his lips, a genuine warmth she hadn't seen before. Understood, Julia Parker, and I wouldn't expect anything less. Months later, the ghosts of her wedding day had finally receded, replaced by the vibrant hum of her classroom. Julia Parker, history teacher, stood before a new group of students, not in a lecture, but in an animated discussion. The Civic Debate Club, her brainchild, was thriving. She watched her students, their faces alight with conviction as they argued points, constructed counter-narratives, and learned to wield language not just as a tool for understanding the past, but for shaping their future. They were learning to build their own shields, just as she had. A stack of gleaming new laptops arrived last month, anonymously donated to the school's technology fund. Julia had smiled, a private, knowing smile. The accompanying note, typewritten and succinct, simply stated, "For the future historians." No name. No fanfare, just a quiet, powerful act of support. She knew. It was just one of the ways Gabriel, subtly and from the shadows, continued to underscore his commitment to her world, respecting the boundaries she had so fiercely drawn. She found him later that evening, not at a gala, but in the quiet intimacy of her Fells Point apartment. Rain, a gentle echo of that rooftop night, tapped softly against the window panes. He was in her small kitchen, making coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. He wore a simple dark shirt, his tailored jacket draped over the back of a chair. The city's dangerous magnate, reduced to a domestic presence, yet still radiating an undeniable magnetic power. He turned, a mug in each hand, his storm-cloud eyes meeting hers. "Long day, teacher?" he asked, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. Julia leaned against the doorframe, a comfortable familiarity settling between them that had been earned through fire. "Always. But rewarding. They're getting good. They're finding their voices." He handed her the mug, his fingers brushing hers, a brief, warm contact. It wasn't a claim, it was an offer, an invitation. "You taught them well," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her, not possessively, but with an admiring understanding. They settled onto her sofa, the city lights blurring outside, the quiet hum of their presence filling the space. The scandal was behind them, a public victory cemented by the Sterling's swift, humiliated retreat from public life. Her name was cleared, her reputation restored, stronger than ever. But the real victory, Julia knew, was the freedom she had found, and the unlikely, fiercely consensual relationship she had forged with Gabriel. He reached for her hand, not in a grasp, but a gentle, questioning touch. She squeezed back, a silent affirmation. This was their rhythm now, explicit, respectful, built on a foundation of battles fought and boundaries understood. There were no grand declarations of ownership, no public displays of possessiveness, just quiet moments, shared trust, and an unwavering respect for each other's worlds. "The board approved the debate club's trip to DC next semester," she told him, her voice light. "I think the kids will love the archives, see history come alive." Gabriel listened, his thumb tracing slow circles on the back of her hand. "Good. They should. The past can teach us much about how to navigate the present." His gaze was thoughtful, a rare glimpse into the complex. mind that had once sought to claim her, and now sought only to understand and support. Their relationship was a quiet rebellion against the expectations of both their worlds. He still ran his empire, moved through shadows, but he did so with a new awareness, a quiet integrity that had been sparked by her unwavering principles. He still donated, still helped, but always from a distance, respecting her desire for her work to stand on its own. And she, the history teacher, now carried a steel-edged confidence, a profound understanding of power and its nuances, learned from the most unlikely of mentors. Julia looked at him, at the man who had torn her world apart, and then, in his own dangerous way, helped her rebuild it, stronger and truer than before. He hadn't rescued her in the traditional sense. He'd given her the tools to rescue herself. He had offered a cage, and she had demanded a partnership. And he had, against all odds, agreed. The rain outside finally stopped. A faint sliver of moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the room. Julia leaned her head against Gabriel's shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. This wasn't a fairy tale ending, nor was it a dark romance of ownership. It was a new beginning, forged in fire and consent, a testament to her agency, and a quiet, powerful promise of a future built on their own, carefully chosen terms. If you enjoyed the video, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our content.